It's one of the most heartbreaking and mysterious family stories in country music history. What really happened to Johnny Cash's children after his death? We all know the legend of the Man in Black, but behind the fame and fire was a complicated family web with secrets most people never saw. Johnny Cash had 5 biological children and 2 stepchildren, but over the years, some of them drifted far from the spotlight, changed their names, or vanished from public view entirely. In this video, we trace each child's path through tragedy, music, estrangement, and redemption. But there's something even more chilling. A final, nearly forgotten video message surfaced in 2023, where one of Johnny's daughters hints at a hidden truth involving their father's final years. A message so powerful, it could change how we remember the Cash family forever. What did Johnny really leave behind? And why have so many stayed silent until now? Stick around, because by the end of this video, everything comes together. Johnny Cash's story begins in Arkansas, but his legacy sprawls across generations. At the center of that legacy are his 5 biological children: Rosanne, Kathy, Cindy, Tara, and John Carter Cash, and 2 stepchildren from his second marriage to June Carter Cash. Each child grew up under the enormous shadow of a man beloved by millions but tormented by his own demons. Life in the Cash household was never simple, never soft, and rarely private. The public saw the music, the love songs, the black suits. But the children? They saw the withdrawals, the come-downs, the long stretches of silence when their father was either on the road or in the grip of something darker. Rosanne Cash, the oldest and most well-known of the children, followed directly in her father's musical footsteps. But even she has admitted in interviews that growing up meant watching her father's battle with addiction unravel the family. She said she adored him, feared him, and spent years trying to define herself outside his shadow. Her relationship with Johnny wasn't always smooth, and there were periods of distance and estrangement. But in later years, they reconnected through music, memory, and mutual respect. She became a Grammy-winning artist in her own right, but you can still hear echoes of her father in her voice, especially when she sings about loss. Kathy and Cindy Cash, Johnny's lesser-known daughters from his first marriage, kept mostly out of the spotlight. Kathy tried music briefly, but both struggled to cope with the family's fractured legacy. In one rare interview, Cindy said, "We were raised with love, but also with chaos. When you're a Cash, you never know if people like you or for him." They both made efforts to live quiet lives, occasionally appearing at tributes and family events, but never sought the fame that Rosanne and John Carter embraced. Tara Cash, the youngest daughter from Johnny's first marriage, remained almost entirely private. She has spoken very little about her upbringing, though she once wrote a letter reflecting on her father's struggle to be present. She described him as a man full of love but constantly in orbit, someone whose fame often came at the cost of fatherhood. That line alone tells you everything. And then there's John Carter Cash, the only child of Johnny and June Carter Cash. He inherited the weight of 2 legendary musical bloodlines. He's become the unofficial keeper of the Cash flame, producing tribute albums, releasing memoirs, and speaking often about his parents' legacy. But even he has hinted that things behind the scenes weren't as perfect as they appeared. In one 2016 interview, he said, "There were secrets, there were ghosts, and some things my parents never talked about." What ghosts? And why bring them up now? That's what we'll uncover next, because behind the music and memories lies a fracture in the family, one that hasn't fully healed to this day. While the world saw Johnny Cash as a legend, A rebel dressed in black, with a voice that could shake heaven, his children saw something more complex, something much more human. After divorcing his first wife, Vivian Liberto, in 1966, Johnny's life with June Carter Cash ushered in a new chapter. But the transition wasn't smooth for the kids, especially for the 4 daughters from his first marriage, Rosanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara, who suddenly found themselves divided between households, cities, and emotional worlds. Rosanne, who was just 11 when the divorce happened, was the most vocal about the pain. She once said, "My dad was gone more than he was home, and when he was home, he wasn't always there." Johnny's addiction to amphetamines and barbiturates didn't end with his first marriage. In fact, the chaos got worse before it got better. The children would receive long-distance phone calls that were half slurred poetry, half apologies. Sometimes he sent handwritten letters. Other times, he disappeared completely for weeks on end. It was love soaked in uncertainty. Kathy and Cindy, the middle daughters, tried to maintain normalcy in the wreckage of a famous father. But it wasn't easy. At school, they were Johnny Cash's kids. At home, they were wrestling with a parent who was trying to be both mythical and mortal. Kathy once described how neighbors would gawk at their house, waiting to see if Johnny would show up. "We weren't a family. We were a headline," she said. Meanwhile, Tara, the youngest of the daughters, became the quiet one. She internalized most of the trauma and rarely spoke publicly. But insiders say she struggled the most with her identity, feeling overshadowed by both the Carter and Cash legacies. Imagine growing up surrounded by fame, but never truly feeling seen. June Carter Cash, to her credit, did try to bridge the two families. She brought warmth, discipline, and a deep Christian faith to the household she shared with Johnny. Her son from a previous marriage, Carlene Carter, and her daughter Rosie, Johnny's stepchildren, were integrated into the family circle. But even that created tension. The dynamics were never easy. Resentments brewed, especially between Rosanne and June, both strong-willed women vying for emotional space in Johnny's heart. And when Rosie tragically died in 2003 in a bus accident, the entire blended family fractured further. All the while, Johnny was beginning his late-life resurgence, the American recordings era that redefined him for a new generation. But as he returned to the spotlight, his children were still holding on to unspoken wounds. They loved their father deeply, but many of them, quietly, wished they had known more of him, the man, not the myth. Next, we dive into what happened after Johnny and June passed away, and how the children's bond was tested in ways no one expected. After the death of June Carter Cash in May 2003, the already delicate balance within the Cash family began to unravel. Just 4 months later, Johnny followed her, passing away from complications related to diabetes and a broken heart that many believe never healed after June's death. Their departures left a void, not just in music history, but in the hearts of the 7 children left behind to navigate the legacy, the grief, and each other. At first, there was unity. The image of the family gathering at Johnny's funeral, a solemn lineup of faces, all carrying the weight of his legend, was deeply moving. Rosanne Cash delivered a eulogy that shook the chapel. She didn't sugarcoat their relationship. She talked about the pain, the beauty, the complexity of being his daughter. She said, "My father was a monument, yes, but monuments cast long shadows, and those shadows sometimes chilled the very people who loved him most." In the months that followed, however, shadows turned to silence. Financial matters complicated everything. Though Johnny had prepared a will, parts of it were vague, and tensions flared over how the estate would be divided. Rosanne, already an accomplished musician with a career of her own, tried to stay above the fray. But even she was drawn into disputes about licensing, royalties, and control over Johnny's posthumous image. Several siblings felt decisions were being made without their input, especially concerning the use of unreleased songs and the marketing of the Man in Black brand. Carlene Carter, Johnny's stepdaughter through June, took a more spiritual approach. She believed that holding on to anger was dishonoring both Johnny and June's memory. But not all the siblings saw it that way. Cindy and Tara, often quieter in the public eye, became vocal in private about feeling excluded. Even the grandchildren, many of whom were coming of age, began to feel the ripple effects of the inner family rift. And then came the final message. Before his death, Johnny Cash recorded a video, a private message intended for his children. It was raw, unpolished, filmed in his home with shaky hands and cloudy eyes. In it, he spoke directly to each child, one by one. He acknowledged his failings, confessed his regrets, and said things he hadn't had the courage to say face to face. To Rosanne, "I know I wasn't always the daddy you needed, but I never stopped being proud of you." To Cindy and Kathy, "You kept the fire going when I couldn't. I owe you more than I ever said." To Tara, "I see you, baby girl. I always did." He also addressed Carlene and Rosie, calling them his bonus daughters, and thanked them for the love they showed his family. When he finished, Johnny whispered a single line, "Tell them I tried." That video, passed privately between the siblings, became both a healing balm and a source of fresh pain. Some took it as closure, others as a too-late apology. But it was undeniably him, honest, hurting, and hopeful that even in death he could still bring his family together. What happened next was anything but peaceful. What followed Johnny Cash's emotional farewell was not the unity he had hoped for. Instead, his children, 5 biological and 2 stepchildren, found themselves in a storm of legal confusion, emotional fallout, and bitter disagreement. The house he had once filled with music, laughter, and redemption had become a symbol of fracture. The core issue? Johnny Cash's estate, and who had control over it. Though Johnny had left a will, the specific language sparked disputes. Portions of his royalties, licensing rights, and ownership of unreleased music were left in the hands of a trust. The executor, a longtime Cash associate, was tasked with preserving Johnny's legacy. But some family members felt that decisions were being made behind closed doors, especially regarding the release of unreleased songs, documentaries, and use of Johnny's name in merchandise. Rosanne Cash, as the most publicly visible child, found herself at the center of it all. She had already built a remarkable music career of her own. But that didn't stop the public, and some family members, from assuming she held more power in the estate than she actually did. Rumors began swirling that she had blocked certain songs from being released or vetoed family-approved projects. She denied those claims, but the tension was real. Meanwhile, Cindy, Kathy, and Tara felt increasingly sidelined. They expressed frustration that the Cash brand was being shaped without equal input from all 7 children. Kathy, in particular, had been instrumental in caring for Johnny in his final years. "It's like we were there for the man," she allegedly told a friend. But now, they only want the myth. Carlene and Rosie, Johnny's stepdaughters through June, tried to play peacekeepers. They reminded everyone of the man who had sat them down and asked them to love one another after he was gone. But even they couldn't stop the slow splintering. The family tried therapy. They tried legal mediation. At one point, there was talk of dividing the estate entirely. giving each child a piece of the rights to manage individually. But that too turned into a maze of red tape, and eventually, lawyers and music executives began taking over the conversations that once belonged to family. And yet, beneath all the fighting, something lingered. Johnny's voice. That shaky final video, still circulating in secret among the siblings, would resurface during these hardest moments. One of the grandchildren even uploaded an excerpt, just a short clip of Johnny saying, "Try to forgive." It went viral overnight. But the damage was already done. Behind the scenes, lawsuits were drafted, meetings were canceled, and family holidays were skipped. The man who had spent a lifetime preaching about love, redemption, and grace had left behind a legacy wrapped in shadows and unspoken grief. And still, one major revelation was yet to come. Something hidden deep in the vaults. Something that would shake the Cash family and the public to its core. That revelation came from a battered leather case tucked away in the corner of Johnny Cash's old office, locked, dust-covered, and almost forgotten. It had been left untouched for years, sitting beneath old lyric notebooks, stage-worn boots, and framed photos of Johnny and June. But when a preservation team working on a Cash family documentary stumbled upon it, they knew immediately it was something different. Inside was a collection of handwritten letters, cassette tapes, and a thick, sealed envelope marked in Johnny's handwriting. "To be opened after my last song is sung." At first, the family hesitated. Was it a legal document? A farewell note? Another private message meant only for June? With both Johnny and June long gone, and lawyers already involved in handling the estate, there was uncertainty about who had the right to open it. Eventually, Rosanne, as the eldest child and one of Johnny's most trusted musical heirs, was given the envelope. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling as her siblings stood around her. Inside was a letter, 6 pages, yellowed with age, dated just a few weeks before Johnny died. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a confession. Johnny had written about regrets, deep, unresolved regrets that had haunted him through his final months. He spoke candidly about the pain he caused in earlier years, his guilt over missed birthdays, broken promises, and the long stretches of silence between him and his children. "I loved you all the same," he wrote, "but I didn't show it the way I should have. My demons often spoke louder than my heart." Then came the line that made every Cash child go silent. "I left behind something I never told you about. A song. One last song. I recorded it alone, just me and a tape recorder, the day before I collapsed. It's in the black trunk under the window, in the cassette marked Ghost Train. Please, don't release it for money. Don't clean it up. Let it sound like it did in that room. It's not for the world. It's for the ones I love." A rush of emotion filled the room. Some wept. Others stood frozen. The infamous Ghost Train tape had been mentioned before in family lore, but no one had taken it seriously. Now, with the letter in hand, it was no longer myth. They found the cassette within minutes. When they played it, the audio was raw and shaky, just Johnny and his guitar. The lyrics were haunting. He sang of a train rolling through empty valleys, carrying his sins, his hopes, and his family's names etched into the steel. At one point, his voice cracked on the word forgiveness. Near the end, he whispered something too soft to hear clearly, but those present claimed he said, "I hope y'all remember me right." That tape would never be released. As the letter instructed, the family kept it private. Only a handful of people have ever heard it in full. But the song sparked a quiet shift. Some siblings who hadn't spoken in years began writing letters of their own, A few started meeting monthly. The lawsuits paused. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something. Johnny's last gift wasn't a hit record or a pile of money. It was a whisper across time. A reminder that legacy isn't measured in fame, but in the love you leave behind, and the courage to face what's been left unsaid. After discovering Johnny Cash's final letter and hearing his unreleased Ghost Train recording, the Cash family found themselves emotionally shaken. But something had undeniably changed. What had started as a fractured family full of unspoken tension, buried grief, and years of distance began to quietly mend itself, piece by piece. Rosanne took the lead. She suggested that each of the siblings, his 5 biological children and 2 stepchildren, write letters back to their father, not for the public, not for a documentary, just as a way to respond to the man who had shaped, hurt, loved, and inspired them. At first, it felt strange, but as each one sat down to write, emotions poured out. Anger, forgiveness, confusion, gratitude. The act of writing became therapy. Some wrote for hours. Others simply scribbled a few lines and cried for the first time in years. These letters weren't shared, but they sparked something deeper. The children, once scattered and distant, agreed to meet in Tennessee, at the old house near the cabin where Johnny had written some of his most iconic songs. They hadn't all been together in over a decade. But for the first time, it wasn't about dividing up rights or arguing over legacy. It was about healing. They sat on the porch, played his old records, and talked late into the night. For a moment, it wasn't about being Johnny Cash's children. It was about being a family again. What happened next felt almost unreal. After years of silence and heartbreak, the Cash children, 5 biological, 2 stepchildren, stood side by side on a small stage in Hendersonville. It wasn't for a concert. It wasn't for a press event. It was for something more intimate, a private tribute to their father, held in the chapel where Johnny once prayed alone. The pews were filled not with industry executives or curious fans, but with friends, old neighbors, and a handful of people who'd been there when Johnny was just a boy with a guitar and a dream. Each child took the microphone, one by one, and shared a story. Not about the legend, but about the man. His quiet guilt after a relapse. The way he kissed their foreheads when he thought they were asleep. The time he stayed up all night sewing a button onto a stage shirt because June was too sick to do it. These weren't headlines, they were truths, soft and sacred, that no museum plaque could capture. Then came the surprise. Rosanne stepped forward and opened a small wooden box. Inside was Johnny's final harmonica, the one he'd kept on his nightstand even in his final days. Without a word, she passed it to her youngest brother. And in that quiet chapel, with no band, no cameras, and no fanfare, he played. The room went still. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. Tears fell, not just from the children, but from the audience. Because in that moment, everyone felt Johnny again. Not the man in black, not the outlaw, just the father, the husband, the flawed but beautiful soul who had tried, failed, and tried again to love the best he could. After the service, the family didn't scatter like they usually did. They lingered. They hugged. They laughed. They promised to meet again. Soon, not years from now. That night, as they sat around the same old table June once decorated with paper napkin flowers, someone brought out a bottle of Johnny's favorite wine. They toasted to the hard memories. to the good ones, and to the truth, raw and painful, that had finally brought them home. But one last secret remained, a discovery none of them expected, one that would change how the world saw Johnny Cash forever. Just days after the family's intimate tribute, something unexpected surfaced. A dusty, unmarked VHS tape tucked inside a storage trunk in Johnny's old office. It had been buried beneath sheet music, tour memorabilia, and forgotten photographs. The trunk hadn't been opened in decades, not since June last packed it away before her final illness. At first, they thought it was just another home video. But as Rosanne popped it into a converter and the screen flickered to life, they all went silent. There he was, Johnny Cash, frail but lucid, seated in a dimly lit room with a worn Bible in his lap. The timestamp showed it was recorded just weeks before his passing. His voice, low and shaky, broke the silence. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and there's something I never got to say." The family froze. He looked directly into the lens, almost like he was staring right through time. His eyes were heavy but focused, as he began to confess years of regret. Not for the drugs, not for the fame, but for the time he lost with his children. "I made music for the world," he said, "but I forgot to sing for my own family." He went on to name each child: Rosanne, Kathy, Tara, Cindy, and John Carter, and even June's daughters, Carlene and Rosie. He apologized for his absences, his cold silences, and the times he let the darkness win. But then his voice cracked with something else: hope. "I see you," he whispered. "All of you. I see what you've become, and I am proud. You are my greatest song." And then came his final message, something no one had ever heard before. A poem, written in trembling ink, recited with tears pooling in his eyes. "When the fire dims and the lights all go, I pray you'll know I loved you so. Not just in songs or lines I penned, but in each sunrise until the end." The screen faded to black, no music, no outro, just silence. The family wept. Not because he was gone, but because, somehow, through that tape, he'd come back to finish what he started. He'd given them the closure no public tribute or platinum record ever could. And in that quiet moment, they realized something sacred. Johnny Cash didn't just leave behind music. He left behind forgiveness, truth, and a final message that stitched their broken hearts back together.